All right, we are back with Sips and Tips number 6. This is a show where I sit down and I sip some coffee and answer your questions, give you some thoughts on rehab, performance, and anything else you guys want to ask. If you don't know the format of the show, you are more than welcome to ask a question in the chat. I have some questions that were submitted beforehand. I have some topics that I'm going to touch on today. Today we're going to be talking a lot about tendons and tendon-related rehab. I feel like this is one of the most common types of injuries that we see. They're often misunderstood, and I want to hit on a couple of key things. But if you have any questions around any type of injury, feel free to put them in the chat. And I'll answer it as I go through some of the things on tendons. Just got to give a big shout out to my friend Mike. He hooked me up with some very nice coffee. I'm not thinking of the name of the coffee right now, but it is very smooth, very delicious. So I'll be sipping on that as I go through this episode. Before we dive into things on tendons and questions and whatnot, if you guys aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, I want you to head over there and check out the Movement YouTube channel. You can find the link in the bio on Instagram. This is something that we're working on building up in 2025. Our goal is to hit 500 subscribers over on YouTube. We're putting out videos every week there. I put the replays of Sips and Tips there as well. So if you can't stick around for this whole live, or you ask a question and you want to go find it, you can head over to the YouTube and check out the full recording of last week's episode, and then this week's episode will go up shortly after we do this live. But let's get into some questions. So tendons are something that I get a lot of questions around. It's a common injury that I see a ton here at the Movement, and I think it's a lot of times misunderstood a little bit. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is a tendon? A tendon connects the muscle to the bone. Tendons are very good at absorbing and distributing forces. They're able to take on a lot of force. Like if we look at the Achilles tendon, when we're running, the Achilles tendon takes on about 120 times your body weight in load. That is a crazy amount of force that is going through that area. Obviously, you have tendons in other areas like your patellar tendon or your rotator cuff, which is more of like a sheath or like a wider tendons that move into each other. We have like pulleys, tendons in our fingers that kind of glide and move along each other. So there's a lot of different tendons, but very commonly we see like rotator cuff tendon irritations. We see patellar tendon irritations. We see Achilles tendon irritations. Those are just some common ones that we see a lot of. And a lot of people want to know, why do tendons get irritated? What happens to them? And more commonly than not, there's two kind of ways that I find tendons get irritated. There's an acute build-in load, or there's a chronic build-in load that leads to these tendons becoming irritated. So like I said before, tendons are really good at taking on forces and load. They're very strong, very resilient tissue. But if we have an acute spike in load to, let's call it the Achilles tendon, an example of how this might happen is if you go from running 0, like I haven't run much since October, and then I go out and I run 100 kilometers like I was prior when I was doing my marathon training, more than likely that is going to be a big spike in acute load that's going to go over my Achilles tendon tolerance to load, and I'm going to get an irritation of the tendon. It is going to flare up, it's going to be sore, it's going to be stiff, painful. More than likely that would cause a spike in pain, discomfort, whatnot. So that's an acute build and load. Another way is a chronic build and load, and this is another thing that happens a lot where you might be experiencing this, and I hear this all the time, be like, I don't know, it just started hurting. I have no idea why my Achilles is bothering me now. There's nothing that's really changed. And then you start diving into it, and they're starting to run for the first time. They're slowly building up their kilometers, but now they're like pushing new territories. Maybe they're trying to run a marathon for the first time, and they're slowly building their load up to the Achilles tendon over time until they reach that tolerance line. And once they go over that tolerance line, it's when they get the response. And to you as the individual, you're like, I don't understand why this is happening. I've been building my running, and now all of a sudden it's flared up. It's because you've chronically built up your load and you've exceeded that tolerance line, and now more than likely your tendon gets irritated. When the tendon's irritated, there's a couple things that it doesn't really like. It doesn't like compressive loading, or it doesn't like tensile force or like heavy kind of pulling loading from like the muscle. So for example, like a heavy calf raise with an Achilles tendon issue, if it's really, really heavy and you're getting a lot of force from the calf muscle contracting, pulling on that tendon, not gonna feel great. If you have that tendon being compressed or stretched kind of over the bone of the heel, for example. So if your Achilles is irritated and you're driving your knee over your toe, what we call dorsiflexion, that might really irritate your Achilles tendon if it's painful down at the insertion. It's going to be sore. That would be more of like your compressive loading. And then there's like friction loading sometimes, like that happens maybe like in the fingers or in the wrists, the elbow. It's like as the tendons are kind of gliding through the sheath, through the tissue, that can also cause a lot of discomfort. But sticking to the example of the Achilles tendon, I find that compressive loading and that high like activation of the calf tensile loading really can irritate the Achilles tendon. And that's when it gets frustrating because tendons are really good at absorbing distributing forces. That's why the Achilles tendon is very resilient in running, but also when they get irritated, they don't like that. And that is what the Achilles tendon would do in an activity such as running. This translates to all tendons. For example, like, the patellar tendon is very similar how they respond. We're big fans of teaching principles that can be applied across different areas of the body. So I'm going to use the Achilles as an example because it's easy and I run a lot and I've been getting a lot of running questions. So once the Achilles gets irritated, now it becomes the hard part. It's like, how do you manage these types of issues? And this is a question that I get a lot is like, should I rest when my Achilles hurts? Should I not? Should I load it? Should I exercise? Should I run? Should I lift? What should I be doing? And this is where I really like to use the principles of calm it down, build it up, and bridge the gap. It really depends on the individual, but more than likely, if you've just flared up, let's say your Achilles tendon, you're really gonna want to calm that tendon down, which might mean removing or resting for a period of time. Now, the key with tendon-based rehab is that we need to load it, and this is where I feel a lot of people make mistakes. So when it comes to tendon-related injuries, the poison and the antidote is load. So the poison and the antidote is load. So that means that what gets you into trouble is overloading or ramping up loading or too much load, but what gets you out of trouble and back to doing what you want to be doing is actually loading the tendon gradually. And where people make mistakes is they remove load, which actually helps the tendon calm down, feels better, say they stop running, but then they do nothing to load that tendon, adapt it, make it stronger, more robust and tolerant to load, and they flare it back up because they say, okay, I've taken 2 weeks off, my pain's feeling better, but now I'm gonna go right back to my previous running routine without loading it. And I think that's where people, make the big mistake, and that's why we're big fans of exercise and load, because that is going to actually adapt the tissue. So in that build it up phase, we're going to start to want to find an entry point to loading the tendon. Now, the thing with tendon-based loading is that there is going to be some discomfort. And this is the other common question that I've been getting a lot of is like, when I have tendon-related injury and I have pain, can I push through that pain? Should I load into that pain? And the answer is yes, you can, but there's also a lot of nuance to that. And so we're okay with a little bit of discomfort when it comes to tendon-related injuries. Early on, we want to really reduce that. So we're probably looking at keeping that very low. We really like to use the stoplight analogy for pain. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of this, but it's common. You have, the green, yellow, red, like your stoplight. The green zone is good to go. So usually, let's call it anywhere between no pain to maybe 1 to 3 on your pain scale is roughly where I say the green zone is. Then we have the yellow zone, which is a little bit more discomfort. We're talking maybe like 5 to 7 out of 10 discomfort. That's your yellow zone. And then the red zone is like your 7 to 10 out of 10. We never want to be in the red zone, and we want to be in the yellow zone infrequently. So we want to be probably 80-20, 80% in the green zone, 20% of the time we might be creeping into that yellow zone. And even early on in tendon rehab, like the start, I even have people like 90-10, 95-5 in the green zone to yellow zone because we really want to calm this thing down. But The reason it's important to use that monitoring system and to know that it's okay is that we actually need to load into some discomfort. And so that's why we like to use that to be like, hey, if we're loading, your initial exercise for your Achilles tendon and it's in the green zone, we're good to go. That's okay, as long as it's recovering, going back to baseline, after the session and by the next loading session, we're usually okay with that, and that tendon's going to adapt, and you're gonna be able to load it more without getting as much of a response. Whereas if we load it and it's like yellow, red zone, then that load's probably too much. We have to tweak it. So it's a good way to monitor discomfort and allow for you to actually load with some discomfort, because like I said, when it comes to tendon-related injuries, it is both the poison and the antidote is load. So in order to improve this, we need to start loading it. So maybe if we're talking about early stage tendon rehab, let's call it, for the Achilles tendon, we want to find an entry point to that. So sometimes that means isometrics, sometimes that means slow eccentric loading, sometimes that means, slow eccentric lowering, concentric movements. Oftentimes it's just a reduced load. So for example, in the early stage, I might do a seated calf raise with a light dumbbell through range, slow and controlled. That might be a good way to enter into loading. Maybe we do an isometric hold. Maybe we're doing a standing isometric hold and that feels okay. These are all just small examples. The exercises themselves, I talked about this before, like exercises are exercises. They're only relevant with the context of the individual. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, this is the best Achilles tendon exercise, this is the best low back exercise. There's exercises in relation to what is going on. But the principles of trying to find an entry point into loading these tissues and gradually building them up, that is the key thing. And we find with tendons, they tend to like heavier, slow resistance loading early on. That's just something that we know will adapt the tendon. So just trying to find an entry point into loading in that early phase is always my goal. And more than likely, we're probably going to avoid compressive forces. We're going to avoid putting a lot of tensile load onto that tendon that's too much and causing discomfort, so that we're not flaring symptoms. Then when we move into the build it up phase, this is where we can really start ramping things up. And I think, again, people get misled. They underload themselves. They don't push the tendon enough. They don't challenge it enough for a couple of reasons. One, they might be afraid. There might be some pain there. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to progress it. Maybe they haven't gotten guidance on like, hey, you actually need to load this thing heavy or heavier progressively. And so in this phase is where we really start to ramp up load appropriate to the individual. But a key thing is that we're exposing the tendon to heavier, slower resistance training so that that tendon adapts. Again, this could look like slow eccentrics. This could look like heavy slow all the way through range up and down. This could look like heavy isometrics. In this phase though, however, I'm going to probably start to expose the tendon to some of the loads that it doesn't like so much, like some compressive loading. So we might start to compress that tendon or stretch that tendon, with the Achilles tendon, with the Achilles, for example. What that might look like is maybe instead of doing a calf raise from the floor, going up, we're going to do a deficit calf raise so that we're getting some stretch at the bottom, it's compressing, and then we're pushing through that and coming up. So that is a big key in the build it up phase. When it comes to tendon related injuries, again, I'm using the Achilles tendon for example, I'm going to start adding maybe some compressive load to it, some more heavier load so that tendon's getting pulled on and adapting so that we're building it up for the things that you want to expose it to. I know I'm kind of rambling here, guys. I'm kind of combining a lot of the questions that I've gotten around this. Like, for example, should I be stretching my tendon? Big common misconception is that like if I have pain, I need to stretch it. I find with the Achilles tendon or patellar tendon or hip flexor tendon, a lot of times people will have tendon related issues and they'll be hammering away on stretching that thing. Like compressive stretching across that bone is something that I see a lot of. We see it in the hamstring as well. Oh, I'm just going to stretch my hamstring. Stretching is not the answer to everything. As much as we want it to be, as much as like society has ingrained this into our head, not saying stretching is bad, but when it comes to tendon related injuries and even things like nerves, like overstretching those things early on are probably keeping you irritated. So really making sure that you know where you're entering into loading these things are key, and that's where getting guidance by a professional that knows how to manage these things are really, really important. So if you have any questions about tendons, about any injury, whatever, feel free to throw them in the chat. I will answer it. But I'm going to move on to talking about another important thing in the build it up phase before we move to bridge the gap. Is in this phase, I'm really starting to think about where does this client have to go. So in the Achilles tendon example that we've been using here, we're thinking about, okay, how do we get this individual back to running? So in my mind, I'm starting to think about the things that I need to check off to get this individual back to running. We need them to be able to take on hopping, so plyometric loading, double leg, single leg. We need them to be strong through the calf. We need them to be able to tolerate longer duration loading. And so some of the things that I might start to implement and start to have checked off is, okay, we need to make sure that we're at least getting at minimum 25 single leg calf raises per side on that Achilles tendon without much discomfort and with good strength before we move on to running. We got to be able to tolerate pogo hopping for a minimum of 30 seconds on a single leg. We need to be tolerating bouts of longer duration walking. So I like 45 minutes back to back of a continuous fitness walk without much discomfort. So these are things in the build it up phase that I'm starting to think about loading this individual or testing for this individual to know where they're at, and are we able to move into the bridge the gap phase, which is where we're really going to ramp up tendon loading. And so making sure that when you're working with someone around these injuries, or you're trying to do this yourself, is that you are checking some of these things off, because far too often people in this phase start to feel a lot better, less painful in their tendon, and then they say, okay, I'm good to go, and they skip that bridge the gap phase altogether. They get back into running, and here we are flared up and back to the calm it down phase, and we don't want that. So making sure that you have these benchmarks that you're checking off that are specific to the tendon related loading is really important. The next phase we're moving into is the bridge the gap phase, and when it comes to tendons, at this point people are feeling really good. They're getting stronger. There's very little pain with compressive loading. They're able to, start to transition maybe back to some of what their sport looks like. But the last phase of rehab that we really want to start exposing this tendon to is high velocity, frequent loading. So what that would look like is plyometric based loading. So with something like the Achilles tendon, we might start absorbing forces first. Tend to see that feels better on tendons. It actually helps improve people. In my experience, like, people are a little nervous sometimes about doing that stuff. So just landing and absorbing stuff is a lot nicer way of doing that. We might do like a offloaded version of a plyometric or a single leg hop. So we might use a box to lean on and offload as the back leg is hopping. We might use a band to offload, but still start to expose that tendon to absorbing and distributing of forces reciprocally, things that tendon is going to take on during running. And then as we move through that phase, we're really going to ramp that up. We're really going to challenge that tendon. We're going to get to things like single leg pogo hops, forward, sideways, lateral, like box jumps, depth drops with jumps, all kinds of powerful, explosive based movements where that tendon is absorbing and distributing force. At the start, I told you, like, the Achilles tendon's taking on like 120 times your body weight. We really need to challenge this tendon and make sure that it's ready to go back to taking on the demands of what you're asking. Far too often, I don't think people get this phase, and they go back and they start running or getting back into their sport, and then they end up flaring up because that tendon's not prepared. The last little thing of that is looking at the sport, and this example we've been using is running, and starting a return to run or a return to sport protocol. So something we do with all of our clients is like, hey, if you're returning to running, we're going to take you through a return to run program, because we don't want you just to go right back to running 3, 5, 6, 10, 12K straight without ever exposing your tendon to that load. So run walks are a nice way to start implementing running, and this is where I talk about running being rehab, not running for performance. We're actually using this running to load the tendon to progress it so that it can take on the demands of the sport that you want. And usually that's going to start with like a 1-minute run and a 3-minute walk, 2-minute run, 1-minute walk, 3-minute run, 1-minute walk. It's going to be a graduated program. Chris Johnson is the man when it comes to that stuff. If you don't know who that is, follow him on Instagram. He's the best when it comes to running. We use his return to run program in some capacity, but we're always taking people through a return to sport protocol or a gradual return to sport, so that they can make sure that they're feeling confident and that their body's ready to take on those loads. And that might even mean just like giving you guidance on how you return to play, how much time. A lot of times people will like be playing basketball and have like tendon related issue that we'll be taking them through rehab. We'll get to the end stage rehab and they're just going to want to go back to playing a full game twice a week. It's like, hey, that's a whole different thing. Like, we need to start to slowly expose you to this. Maybe we get you on the court and do some controlled practice. Maybe you then do like a pickup game where you're playing maybe 20 minutes or 15 minutes and then you're having a break or whatever. I'm just throwing random examples out there. We'd sit down and map this all out. But I think it's really important that that part of rehab is broached with every client, because that's where we see a lot of the challenges with these injuries. So I know I've been going on and on, but I really, really do think that that is very key when it comes to tendon-related injuries, and I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think if you can understand the principles that I just went through of like what irritates a tendon, why it might be staying irritated, how you can modify certain things so you're not irritating it early on, how you're able to progressively build up the shoulder and the build it up shoulder, the tendon in the build it up phase, how you can bridge that gap and what loads you should be exposing to. If you can understand even that, what I just went through, you now have a good way of applying this to most tendon related injuries. That could go a long way, right? And it can make these things seem a lot more normal in the sense of like, oh yeah, I guess I haven't been running all winter and I just ramped up my running to 50K a week. No wonder my tendon's irritated. Let me go through these principles. And that's why we're always trying to preach that kind of stuff here. I think educating and empowering you guys and the community about these things are going to be a great way for us to get a better handle on them and not having them be something that is constantly recurring. So before we wrap up here, guys, if you have any questions, again, around any rehab stuff, I talked a lot about tendons just now, but throw them in there. I appreciate you guys tuning in for this episode. If you're still sticking around, we do have some free content around tendons. Send me a DM and I will get you a video that I made breaking this down even more in depth. And then we also have an ebook around it. So feel free to send me a DM after this and I will send it to you so you can access it. The other thing, guys, is we're really trying to get the Movement YouTube channel up. We're at 209 subscribers right now. We want to get to 500 by the end of the year. We're putting out content there every week. We just dropped a video about like fueling and nutrition. This week we have another video coming out around Will's road to 50K. We've been documenting his series on running his first ultra marathon, trying to avoid tendon-related injuries. So lots of good stuff over on the Movement YouTube channel. If you're here and you liked what we do, you like what we put out, head over to YouTube, find the YouTube channel. It's in the link in our bio. Subscribe. I would love to have you guys there. We want to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year. But that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to Sips and Tips episode 6. If you guys have questions, feel free to DM me these questions and I will answer them on the show. Or come online, come on the live and ask your question because I love to answer those as well. But thanks so much, guys. Have a great day. Remember, stay caffeinated. We'll see you in the next one.